Each one of us has 24 hours a day. What matters is how we use them. In Estonia, we've created a business environment that lets you thrive, where you can focus on getting things done, where you can realize ideas that make a difference, and where no goal is unachievable.
Hello! It is a pleasure to warmly welcome you to our first webinar from the land of unicorns. My name is Maris Prii, and with my colleague Alvar, we will be your hosts today. My background is heavily in operations, corporate governance, and early stage investments. Here in the US, I represent the Estonian Investment Agency. And with a base in San Francisco, my goal is simple: to be the spokesperson of Estonia's digital society, its compelling business environment, and its startup scene, and to promote foreign direct investments to Estonia. I have been in the middle of our startup ecosystem for much of my career, among other things being the COO of Startup Wise Guys, which has grown to be the biggest accelerator program in Europe, and also helping launch the Estonian Startup Visa program.
Hi, I'm Alvar Susar, and I serve as Director for US Investment and Trade in the Business Diplomacy area of Estonia's Foreign Ministry, based out of the embassy in Washington. I came to this role last year after a 25-plus-year career in capital markets and investment management, and I'm excited to put my experience and contacts to work on behalf of my parents' country of origin. Estonia has a number of compelling business opportunities, which over this seminar series, we will help introduce you to. But first, we thought it would be helpful to talk about Estonia's place on the world stage. We have a population of 1.3 million, somewhere between Montana and Maine. We're in Northern Europe with an area of nearly 17,500 square miles, which would be somewhere between Maryland and West Virginia. Finland is to our north, Sweden to our west, Russia to our east, and Latvia to our south. We're part of the European Union and the Eurozone, of NATO, and we currently hold a seat on the UN Security Council. Our business climate is decidedly Scandinavian, but is combined with a low cost of doing business. And as the video showed, a very business-friendly tax structure. Taxes are just one example of Estonia's government. 99% of whose services are available online.
That's right. Innovation is everywhere in Estonia. In addition to being the world's first digital country, our economy is highly export-oriented. Estonia has a 2-decade track record of successful innovations and investments, which have delivered outstanding returns, both for founders, venture capital and private equity, and corporate investors. Given the size of population, Estonian startups have a born global mentality from the very beginning. I'm going to mention next very briefly some indicators of Estonian startup sector. According to State of European Tech 2020 by Atomico, Estonia has 4.6 times as many startups per capita as the European average. So on a population adjusted basis, Estonia is the capital of European startups. And globally, we go back and forth with Israel for the largest number of unicorns per capita.
Yeah, but we're in the lead at the moment, right?
We are. These unicorns include, for example, Skype, TransferWise, and Bolt, which is Uber's biggest global competitor and dominating European and African markets. In 2020, Estonian startups generated sales that were 43% above previous year. So evidently, despite the global pandemic, the startup sector is growing strongly. We have a clear and simple legal environment with incentives benefiting both startups and investors. For example, Estonia has one of the best stock option plan regulations in the world. There are two big reasons for Estonia's ability to generate interesting startups: our e-residency and our startup visa programs. with the latter helping founders outside of European Union grow their businesses in Estonia and Estonian startup companies to easily hire non-EU talent. That is why our startup ecosystem is highly international, with about a third of founders and 25% of employees being foreigners. But with that, back to you, Alvar.
So why are we here today? Despite a handful of prominent investments into some of the companies that Mari's just mentioned, and Blackstone's 2018 $1 billion plus acquisition of a bank, US investors have not been particularly active in Estonia. And when they do arrive, a huge amount of the potential value has already been realized. That value, of course, accrues to local and regional or European VCs and family offices, which is fine. But this is simply due to a lack of awareness of the investment opportunity by US family offices and individual investors. To that end, you will hear shortly from an early stage investment arm of Ross Perot Jr.'s family office, which only months ago announced its first investment into Estonia. But first, we're welcoming Sutt, Estonia's Minister of Entrepreneurship and Information Technology, who will join us with some words, followed by Perot Jain.
And then discussion between two legends of Estonian startup ecosystem, Margus Uudam from Karma.vc and Sten Tamkivi, former CEO of Skype, longtime investor and current president of the Estonian Founders Society. Afterwards, Alvar and I will be back for Q&A, so hold your questions for then.
Good afternoon from Estonia. Estonia is a country that extends beyond its borders. We are a small EU member state in Northern Europe with a global ambition. Digital has been our growth engine. Being digital empowers us. But digitalization is rarely a question of technology. It is about mindset. You need digital-minded leadership to make e-governance a reality. Estonia had this general push for digitalization in the 1990s, which propelled us to where we are today. Estonians are known for a pragmatic approach to tech, a culture to innovate, low bureaucracy, and result-driven mindset. We are a perfect testbed for trying out new ideas and solutions. Governments should be at the forefront of digital transformation and the enablers of it. Innovation needs a proper legal framework and a decent digital infrastructure from the state. Laws and online services need to be understandable and easy to use. The logic is simple. The government would set certain parameters and service expectations. The execution is left to the private sector. We were quick to create new solutions in response to the COVID crisis with the help of private sector. For example, the government worked alongside several IT companies to create a COVID-19 contact tracing app and also the new digital COVID certificates. Where business is easy, business will grow. In Estonia, we can do everything without leaving your couch, from starting a company and declaring taxes to filing annual reports. That is why Estonia is also among the countries hosting the highest concentration of startups per capita. And Estonia is definitely a startup country. Ever since creation of Skype in Estonia by an international team in 2003, the startup ecosystem has developed. People building companies like Skype in the early days of our startup ecosystem have been essential into creating the startup culture in Estonia. By now, we have more than 1,100 startup companies in Estonia, and we have 7 unicorns. For the last 5 years, Estonian startup sector have grown roughly 30% every year, measured by revenues, created jobs, or capital raised. There are currently around 6,500 jobs created by the sector, which is roughly 1% of Estonian working population. Already, the sector is creating 2-3% of GDP. By keeping the current growth of a tech sector for 10 years, it will create 50,000 new jobs and make up circa 30% of the GDP. We have also opened for digital services to the world and are eager to expand. The air residency provides a transnational digital identity to anyone in the world to do location-independent businesses online. I invite you to join our digital nation, run a company in the European Union from a distance, and digitally sign documents. The Startup Visa helps non-EU founders grow their startup in Estonia, and it also makes it easy for Estonian startups to hire non-EU talent. We are open for business and talents are welcome. Foreign investments are key to the Estonian economy and a top priority for the government. Green and digital transitions offer the greatest opportunity of this century. Estonia has its digital state success story, but our ambition is growing. Our goal for the coming years is to become a country of innovation. Estonia. Talent attraction, development of capital markets, and regulatory modernization will make Estonia an attractive place for investment. From multinational companies to high-growth startups, Estonia has a track record of successful investments and innovation. I invite you to be part of this journey.
Hi, my name is Cindy Revol. I am a principal with Perot Jain. We're an early stage venture capital firm based here in Dallas, Texas. We invest solely on behalf of our two founding partners, Ross Perot Jr. and Anurag Jain. So while we are a venture firm, we also act like a family office since those are our only limited partners. And the way we invest is we invest in companies where we can be a strategic partner by leveraging the unique operating platform that our partners bring to the table. And so that lends itself really well to industries like healthcare, real estate, mobility, prop tech, that kind of thing. So I wanted to give a little background about who we are before answering some of the webinar questions. So the first question was, what initially attracted Perot Jain to Estonia? Which is a great question since we are a Dallas-based firm. Why in the world are we looking so far away from home? Well, ultimately, our partner, Anurag Jain, visited Estonia a couple years ago, and he was just extremely impressed with what he saw, and he wanted to learn more about how we may gain access to the unique innovation coming from the country. So we did some research and looked further into the Estonian ecosystem, and we were really attracted to the amazing companies and the unique public-private partnerships in this country. And so after looking into different venture firms and different organizations coming out of the country, we decided to join the Estonian Venture Capital Association. We were already members of the US-based VCA, so we thought maybe joining the Estonian version would yield some great relationships and introductions, and thankfully we were right about that. So we joined that organization to meet people in the VC community, of course, virtually. It was COVID times, of course. And what we found was a small country with an incredible concentration of innovative startups backed by such a supportive ecosystem. So the next question is, what surprised you most about Estonia? Well, it's a little bit tough to answer because we were just so impressed and surprised by a lot of things. But ultimately, first of all, we were just so thankful with how welcoming and tight-knit the venture and startup community is there. From our initial conversation with Kadri at the Estonian VCA to everyone else we met, we just felt very welcomed. And we were so excited to meet everybody over there and hear about the amazing things that you all are doing. And then further, we were really impressed with the amazing amount of innovation and technology coming from such a small place. We could see how this public investment and focus on technology had really spilled over to every other sector, and just thought it was such an amazing way to foster innovation and create such a unique ecosystem. So we're just thrilled to be a part of it. The next question is, why did you invest in Estonia? So for those of you that don't know, we are limited partners now in Terra Ventures. Terra is also a member of the Estonian Venture Capital Association. So we really don't often invest as LPs into funds. We do so very, very selectively. We typically prefer that direct investment into early stage companies. But after meeting with a few people that were also VCA members, we decided to go forward with Terra, primarily due to their unique access to some of the top entrepreneurs and technologies coming out of Estonia, but also the broader Baltic region. Particularly their focus on the kind of seed early stages of these companies' life cycles. We believe some of the top tech talent and innovation is coming from your region. And as an early stage investor, we wanted to expand our portfolio to include these amazing young companies. and gain access to what we're seeing there. So ultimately, we saw a lot of great technology, like I said, coming out of the area, and we wanted to be a part of it. So we thought trying to go after individual companies would be challenging given we're based in Dallas. It was also COVID, so we couldn't travel. So we wanted to invest with a partner, and we found one in Terra. And so while we know there is definitely Western interest in this region, we're not new to this by any means. We did notice that the primary focus of Western investment is typically a little bit later stage. And so we wanted to focus on that early stage, that seed stage, kind of Terra Ventures bread and butter, as well as ours here in the US. And we thought this was an opportunity to get in on the ground floor with some of these companies and help these early companies create their global strategies. So I talked about our firm a little bit earlier, but our secret sauce as a family office is leveraging our operating platform to be a strategic partner for our portfolio. We believe we can be a US-based strategic partner for many of the Estonian companies and help them grow in Europe and the US and globally. Our two founders are operators, they're entrepreneurs themselves, and that's how we think about investing. How can we leverage this unique platform to help our portfolio investments grow, acquire customers, scale, do whatever it is that they need to do, leveraging the unique expertise that our partners, as well as their executives and their staff bring to the table. So we feel like we bring you a unique value to the table, and we wanted to bring that to the Estonian companies and bring these companies here and show the world what Estonia has got. So finally, what are our expectations for Estonian startups going forward? Well, I think the sky's the limit ultimately. I think the region will continue to be a startup hub and continue to gain global recognition that rivals much larger countries. I think that's already happening clearly. There is no lack of top talent in the region, and I think that will continue to foster new technology companies along with the extreme support of the government, and all of the technology innovations that are going on the public sector as well, and the public-private opportunities. I just think it's such a unique space to really foster and grow technology with some really strong entrepreneurs, engineers, talented people, etc. So I think Perot Jain, we are just super fortunate to be on the early side of this trade, and that many big investors, including from the West, will hopefully follow us into these earlier stages of investment and gain access to what we're already seeing. I think you're going to see a lot more unicorns coming from the Estonia and the Baltic region. I think it's just a matter of when, probably sooner rather than later. And ultimately, as an investor, we hope to just be a small part of that future. We're just so excited about the partnership with Terra, our membership as part of the Estonian VCA, and we've actually already made one investment in an Estonian-based company called 10 Lines, which we're really excited about, and we hope to be making many more in the near future. Thank you very much for having me as part of this webinar today. I look forward to meeting many of you who I have not had a chance to meet, and thank you so much for welcoming us to this community and letting us be a part of it.
Hi, and welcome everybody to join our discussion about the Estonian startup and venture investment ecosystem. I am Margus Uudam, chairman for Estonian Venture Capital Association, and also founding partner at Karma.vc, which is early stage investor investing in Estonia, Baltic countries, and across Europe in deep tech startups. And thank you, Sten, for joining. Sten Tamkivi is an extraordinary person in Estonia, being one of the key figures developing Estonian ecosystem for startups and investors. You're a founder, you were part of early Skype success out of Estonia. You're an investor, angel investor, you're an investor in funds. So I think the best person to give an overview of what's happening over here. So Sten, over to you for a introduction, a bit more about your background and and what's your take on Estonian ecosystem?
Thanks, Margus. Always good to see you. And hey, everyone. My name is Sten. I'm a software entrepreneur. I've been building companies since I was 18, starting out here in Estonia, sometimes founding them myself, sometimes helping others build theirs. In the latter category, the biggest story, as Margus alluded to, both for me and for Estonia on some level, has been Skype, which I joined quite early and stayed until the big Microsoft acquisition. So that was sort of the mid-2000s first experience of building something out of tiny Estonia that eventually had 300 million monthly active users around the world. And since then, the company that I most recently founded was called Teleport. We got acquired a few years ago, and that has turned into something now called Topia. And just most recently, I started a new sort of investment partnership with my friend Taavet, also from early Skype and early TransferWise fame. And we are now doing what we can to support the next generation of founders. And on that note, Estonia is a very exciting place where to do that. In a country of 1.2 million people, somehow we've created this ecosystem where there are 1,100 startups and counting here. So the highest number per capita at the bottom of the pyramid, and also at the top of the pyramid, we now count 7 unicorns to date, which is an example that there is a very healthy, buzzing environment of young people coming together, trying to build something using creation of companies as a mechanism how they want to impact the world, and a healthy number of them actually succeeding. So if you look at most of the numbers in the startup sector in Estonia, then there are, I think, about 6,000 people, 7,000 people working in early stage tech these days. That number has been growing 25-30% year on year for like 5 or 6 years. So healthy growth rates that you want to see with individual companies also apply to the startup sector here. And most of those companies, like as a friend of mine once said, Estonia is not the market; it's actually a country. So anything you start, you always have to think. If you want to build a big company, you always have to look outside. So there is a lot of ambition, a lot of this sort of fearless conquering in the world that comes from those early teams, and some of them really break through.
So what is it for you that has made Estonia such an extraordinary place? There is a fair argument that it can be only luck as well, because if you look at the early days, there was no systematic development of startup ecosystem. There was no systematic development, to fund startups, and very few were aware what it means. And suddenly, after Skype was sold to Microsoft, it all started. Is it potentially a matter of luck? Was there something systematic behind it for you?
I think it's. I do sincerely believe that the small size actually is an advantage here, because again, if you think of tech companies, it's very typical that there is a tiny challenger that enters a market, and there is an incumbent 10 or 100 or 1,000 times bigger and mightier and well funded and all that, but somehow that tiny one still is able to sort of win the big one in their own game, so to say. And usually that happens by being ingenious about figuring out a way how to apply ingenuity, creativity, and sort of take bold risks and create something that maybe the bigger, slower, more comfortable incumbents wouldn't dare. And so if you think of that mindset working in startups, becoming and competing with large tech companies, I think you can apply that to societies and economies as well. So if you look at the sort of the backstory of Estonian tech sector, the country became re-independent after the Soviet occupation only in '91. So you have a bunch of people who one morning wake up in a country where being an entrepreneur used to be a criminal offense when I was in middle school, or And all of a sudden it's a clean, empty playground where anybody can create anything. There is no hierarchy. There is no sort of top-down structure that tells you that you have to work through a 20-year career in a big company, whatnot. But like, go ahead, do something. And because it was early 90s, it also coincided with the internet. So when I finished high school in 96, it was like 3 years after the graphical web browser came out. It was like people were getting online. And because of the sort of Estonian sort of recent history, we didn't have any legacy technology in place. So if somebody founded a bank in Estonia, they kind of did it tech first. If somebody was thinking of doing something in the government, building a registry of some kind, they skipped paper because we now had this sort of, we could do it on the internet. And so this, you could call it luck, you could call it coincidence, but there was this definitely some alignment of stars, a reset in the economy and the breaking point in the sort of history of technology where the internet went to mainstream. That definitely helped. And then this small size allows you to move faster. Very often in a place where a German company would put a 40-person team with 3 layers of project management structure and certified Prince2 project management processes in place, Estonians would be sitting in a room with 2 guys and girls scratching their head and thinking, okay, how do we get it done with 2 people? and that makes you, again, creative, and which makes you, I think, competitive.
Yeah, I think Estonian government, like the first one, was very entrepreneurial as well. So the first prime minister was 33 years old and was not afraid of making like risky decisions or wrong decisions potentially. And then we did one thing differently from rest of Eastern European countries. We privatized everything very fast, yeah. which resulted a good inflow of foreign direct investments, good corporate governance, a lot of talent inflow as well for management and building businesses. So it was entrepreneurial. Yes.
I think there was even I think a smarter hack was, I think we outsourced privatization to the Germans. So it's basically like we're in many other sort of countries with communist history, the privatization was sort of the way how oligarchs were born, because you could buy a factory really cheaply. Because that process here, as I understand from my parents' generation, so to say, that was a bit before then I cared about buying factories, but the process was transparent and run by the book by somebody from outside. So we still don't have proper oligarchs.
Yep. And then everything from the government side as well was built like based on e-infrastructure. So keeping in mind efficiency and continuity as well. So this has been part of our DNA quite a lot as well.
Absolutely. And it's interesting in retrospect how it worked in sync. Like if you look at Silicon Valley, for example, like I've lived there for about 10% of my life, mostly in Palo Alto. And it's always puzzled me is that you're sitting there with sort of people who build the biggest search engine on the planet that organizes the world's information, and people who build the best retail experiences by selling phones and computers with a piece of fruit on their logo. And then if you have to visit DMV, it's like going 2 centuries back. Like the gap between sort of what is the expectation for a private service versus a public service is massive. While in Estonia, it's kind of like, maybe it's kind of the same people and friends hanging out, and the tax board guys are like hanging out with the banking girls and discussing, okay, how can we build it in a way that is more efficient? We can do identity jointly and move data back and forth, and it kind of like elevates on both sides.
Exactly. So but if we come fast forward, what if we discuss a bit about the characters of Estonian founders? And then from time to time, it's really hard to understand. The breakthrough stories have happened, for example, Pipedrive, CRM, in the world of competition of 1,000 other CRMs, or Bolt going against Uber, where Uber was dominating the market. Or TransferWise, going against all banks at the time and then building success out of it. So it is not based on science, university research, strong technological competitive advantage in first place, but it is something super entrepreneurial from such a tiny place. So what do you think, what forms Estonian founders' kind of DNA, mindset and thinking?
I think there is a lot of pragmatism and a lot of sort of keeping your 2 feet on the ground and sort of building something that is valuable for people early. Like if you all those companies that you listed are creating something that can be built in months and then consumed by somebody in days and already getting value out of it, which is like there is also like a massive space of companies that you can build with a extremely long time horizon, like these moonshot companies where you have to do like, I don't know, 6 years of failing trials or clinical trials or engineering effort or like hardcore physics before you solve some particular kind of a energy transmission related problem before you get to a working product. We do have a few of those companies happening as well. But the majority of the effort, I would say, goes into more pragmatic, more revenue-driven, quite frequently actually bootstrappable businesses that you can sort of create and get going off the ground. And I think the big enabler there has been software. Like I don't think this sort of a startup scene would have existed in sort of early 90s, where you had to pay $1 million for a Sun server and Oracle licenses to even be able to host a website. But in this day and age where it doesn't really matter if you're in San Francisco or New York or Amsterdam or Shanghai or Tallinn, and you can borrow your mother's credit card and boot up an Amazon instance and host your website today with $15, like that, I think enables like all kinds of new kinds of problem solving that doesn't have this barrier. And software teams especially can move fast. They can be extremely nimble. They can be they're completely irrelevant where the location is. Like the marginal cost of adding another 1 million users is near zero. So those things fit these sort of small teams in remote corners of the planet, I think, very, very well. So they like a very practical example, the first version of Skype was built by basically 4 engineers in less than 6 months. And 2 months later, it had the first 1 million users. So you put 4 Estonian dudes in a room and 1 million people can talk for free anywhere on the planet. So I always think of this as a sort of a ratio of person hours put in converted to the value generated for the world. And I think that ratio tends to be quite high here.
It also sounds like our limitations, like 1.2 million population, you know, location and so on, that some can consider as limitation. Actually, they tend to work as enablers or the pressure to achieve, and we see it more as an opportunity rather than limitation, while it's so easy to see it as limitation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like if you come from a tiny sliver of the human population, then you have more respect for what I guess what the other people might want or think about, or like languages is a simple one. If you come from a language group that is spoken by 1 million people, you kind of intuitively know that 7.5 billion don't speak it, so you might want to localize your product. Like that's something that I've seen over and over again, broader in Europe and especially in Estonia. It's like you would have a company in the US building exactly the same thing, but they have hard-coded dollars and English language. So if you look at the way the internet population has shifted, US is like 5% of the world market. So if you want to be competitive in more diverse, more sort of segmented and scattered global markets, then actually starting from a smaller place seems to give you a little bit more intuition about it, how to do that.
On that note, you're a perfect person to compare US and Estonian kind of ecosystem, if that's possible. You have been based out of US for many years. what is the possible view from US to Estonian ecosystem? How do you compare it?
I think the main thing is that I was surprised when I was living in the US about 6 or 7 years ago, more recently, was that how little Americans generally think about Europe when it comes to tech. It's like if you're living on the west coast of US, then it's like San Francisco, the Bay Area. Then there's a little bit of sort of mental distance. Then there's New York, and something is happening in Boston and so forth. And then there's China and India and like a lot of things over the Pacific. And then Europe tends to be, for so many people still, like, oh, Paris is nice. I took my spouse for a vacation last year. It was beautiful. Like, Europe is great. And at the same time, if you look at the numbers in the VC industry, if you look at the creation of unicorns, if you look at the growth of technology, so many places in Europe are really happening. Would it be the European investors investing in European companies, European talent coming out of universities, building Europe. And so on that landscape, on that picture, I believe that Europe has become way more competitive and been flying under the radar for many Americans, technologists and investors included. And inside Europe now, then there's this sort of internal competition of areas. And generally, I think the belt of Northern Europe has been outperforming Southern Europe. And it's a longer story of why that might be. But if you look at sort of the companies, the main tech hubs, they tend to be like, if you start from Dublin, London, Copenhagen, Berlin, Stockholm, Helsinki. There are great gaming companies in Iceland. Like it's like this belt, and the other end of that belt is Estonia. So small country, fast-moving environment, a lot of local talent, very open for other people to move here, to build companies from here, very open to foreign investments for the last 30 years, very sort of optimized for, like, you create your company online in 12 minutes and you do the taxes, or the tax board software does it for you, and like you don't spend many cycles worrying about the sort of bureaucratic side of putting up a company. So you can get going today and focus on solving your customers' problems. And if you look at what that same effort would be in many other countries in the world, that's not like a given, which we're used to here.
So at the same time, it's interesting that for many years, actually, Estonian startups were mostly funded by US venture funds.
Yeah,
we have had Bain Capital, Bessemer, Insight Venture Partners, Union Square Ventures, and they found exactly. So they found Estonia like way before UK investors, German investors, who became much more active after few unicorns were already created. So what do you think? Why is that? Why US has appreciated, and really tier one funds have appreciated Estonian startups and founders? Is there some similarities in mindset to come over here and finance like really early stage companies?
I think if you look back, so we mentioned Skype before. Skype was a 2003 founded company that exited to eBay in 2005. So basically, we have this history of 15 years working with American tech sector and sort of the VCs that got involved after when eBay exited Skype. So I think that's the sort of the time horizon. And absolutely, the US venture industry over the last 15 years has been the most adventurous, most sort of risk-taking, most experienced, and so forth. So they've had the best nose of picking where the best companies come. Typically, like 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it was like the assumption was that you can be from anywhere, but of course you will come to the US to build a great company. I think now what's shifted, two things have happened. First of all, the US investors are still great, and they've had this head start. I think they're relying less, especially in sort of post-pandemic remote working world. Nobody expects you to move your company to the US if you're building something global, like wherever it's happening. So, and probably the great American investor names that you mentioned, finding Estonia was like a prelude to that. Like they were early pioneers of that phenomenon. Like Mark Andreessen once quip that like to get in the door, like if you're an Estonian founder, that this makes it definite that he will listen, which has been very beneficial for a generation of founders who came, like they funded Skype, they funded TransferWise, and have been talking to many founders ever since. So it's also a network business, as you know very well, that once some founder, one company ends up in the network, and then some employees go from that company to create next ones, that sort of network starts expanding. And I'm very happy and proud that some of those super nodes in the US are so tightly connected to the nodes in Estonia. So that's another maybe metaphor for Americans to think about, is that if a Spanish or a Brazilian company comes to the US market, it's not like entering the US. They would probably pick a state where to settle down. Like, let's set up an entity in Delaware. Let's create an office in New York. And so that's another way, maybe looking from America, is like, okay, if you want to land in European Union, if you want to have a foothold, you don't need to go to the biggest city or the biggest country, but you could set up the entity in Estonia, do something in Luxembourg, and go for these tiny places that give you more flexibility and mobility, but it's the same space, the same currency, the same, so increasingly the same regulations as these much bigger European countries.
So US kind of venture funding and investors have made significant difference to where we stand. And I remember it was always the case that, funding, you need to go to US, you need to find US investor. And it is because of a global mindset. And I don't remember somebody thinking like, I need to go to Germany to find funding. So initial roots, it really started Estonia, US strongly linked and being successful, creating success out of it.
I think it's also like, I think it's a major macro trend, is that by having more tech growth and success and talent spread around the planet, that means that there is also the investors in the very earliest stages tend to be closer culturally, physically, whatever, to the sort of teams in the very early stages. So over time, it's easier and easier to go and fund the very first stages of your company locally. And then as the rounds get bigger and as you hit global success, then it's highly more probable that you will eventually talk to a US investor in a later round, even if you come from Estonia. But that also means that if there is a US investor who wants to benefit from innovation here, you need to sort of work with Estonian VC funds and make sure you become the LP in the right places, so that you hit those companies way earlier than they come seeking to a US VC, right? Or like, I don't know, you tell me, like Estonian VCs, like how often do you see US LPs actually?
So it's still quite rare, but increasingly there is inflow of US investors, firstly setting like fund of funds and venture funds setting presence in Europe. And we increasingly see also among our membership that family offices are joining Estonian Venture Capital Association looking for opportunities. And it has been materialized in both ways. So investing directly in companies, investing in funds. So, and quite often family offices are incredibly well connected strategically in the US. That is a significant value for the companies and startups over here. So there is a natural link how these kind of business relationships can built in a strong way. Maybe to wrap it up, Sten, what's your vision for Estonian startup ecosystem? It feels like it's exploding, and is there a risk in 10 years that it's too hot to touch?
Yeah, any explosion has a little bit of risk. No, so again, if you have something like, we're used to exponential growth, like you and I see that every day. That's what we do for work. And the thing with exponential growth is that for a bystander, for an innocent bystander, it typically looks like a flat line that all of a sudden jumps out. Would it be a spread of a virus or a growth of a tech company, that in the beginning it feels like nothing is happening, then everything happened overnight. And we're definitely hitting that curve. So this number, the 25-30% growth year on year that we've seen over the last few years, that means that if you extrapolate that, today the tech sector, sort of the startup scene, is about 3% of Estonian GDP, and we employ about 1% of the working population. If you plot that line forward at the modest 25% annual growth, we're going to be further the economy, further the GDP by 2030, and we will have 100,000 people working in sort of tech export companies, which, just for context, there are 650,000 people overall working in the country. So it's like a 1-to-5 ratio of people in tech versus people in other jobs and industries. Today already tech startups are larger than agriculture in Estonia, which is kind of funky. So this sort of growth requires like a few pieces to be sustainable. Like there is access to talent is the main one. So it's a great environment to put up small teams. It's a very, very hard environment where to grow into thousands of engineers, for example. And that will always be so. And that means that like it needs investment in local education, which is happening, and the entrepreneurs are giving back in that, and the government is dealing with that. It needs attracting more sort of foreign talent to come and study in Estonian universities, and then hopefully stay for some of them to create companies or join them. It requires for founders to move to Estonia to start more companies here than only Estonians could, which usually happens with vibrant ecosystems. And today about 20-something% of the tech crowd here are from somewhere else. So there are implications on visas and rules around immigration and taxation and all these things that sort of maintaining that environment. But I believe when we continue on the track where we're now, the train is already moving, and it's going to be very, very hard to stop that. And then most of the companies that start here from that way, they will end up with a network of places and offices and remote working people and whatever around the world. But that's fine. Like in any company, you want to have some people in different places, closer to customers, closer to partners. So probably you will continue to see many companies that are somewhat Estonian in some regard, but they might have a lot of US presence, a lot of presence in Japan, a lot of presence in Africa. There are several Estonian companies conquering that continent now. And I think being this sort of, my vision to sum it up would be that Estonia will be this sort of open, flexible, nimble part of that puzzle, but not seeking to dominate. You have to be here and build a company and never leave. I think it's more of a foothold for building global things.
So being globally connected for a small ecosystem like Estonian it's only a good thing.
Absolutely.
So thank you all for joining, and Sten, thank you for giving us a glimpse of how the ecosystem has developed and where it's heading to. I hope it has been very useful and to inspire a few thoughts to study and then learn a bit more. Thank you all.
Thank you, Margus, and hope to see all of you in Tallinn very, very soon.
Well, thank you very much, Sten and Margus. That was actually incredibly interesting. There was a couple of things that I want to underscore about what they said. Family offices are a very attractive investor for startups in Estonia, mostly due to their strategic connections. And also Sten's mention of see you in Tallinn soon. We hope to do that before too long. We've had a few questions come up, and please feel free to ask more, but the first one was interested in opening a base of operations and want to understand procedures and laws for overseas investors. What kind of support is given by the government if an investor is to consider setting up a car assembly plant, for example? And Maris, maybe you could answer some of those.
Yeah, sure. I think that one of the first things to set clear here is that in Estonia, there is no difference if you're overseas or foreign investor or a local entrepreneur. The laws are exactly the same. The taxation is exactly the same. So technically, there is no difference. When it comes to government support, then Estonia is known for its very simple, transparent tax system. And that's one of the strongholds, for our economic policy, our fiscal policy as well. But at the same time, that means that government is not really very interested in giving exemptions to different companies. So everybody are treated equally. Now, that being said, still, Enterprise Estonia, the organization where my Invest Estonia belongs to, does allocate government grants. So these grants are for the different, like within different sums. It could be up to 3 million, for example, with the big investor support. There's more information available on our website, and I can, those who are interested, I can forward you 1 or 2 pager overview of the grants that we have at the moment. Grants obviously mean that every investor would have to invest from their side as well, a certain percentage, so that the government grants are like 10 to 50% of the total costs. But I think in a very simple overview, I think that answers to the question, perhaps. Is there something you would like to add here?
Yeah, well, I think actually there was just a follow-up or related question from another person asking if there's a tax treaty between the US and Estonia covering investments. And I know there are several tax treaties between the US and Estonia specifically on investments. Can you answer that, or?
Specifically about covering investments, I'm not so sure. I know that there is a treaty in place for the avoidance of the double taxation, which is like a standard thing with the majority of the countries in the world, that Estonia has like a treaty in place. In general, that should cover multiple business activities, but for specific investments, we can look it up to get confirmation from perhaps the Ministry of Finance and Economics, and then we can come back to you, Juan, who was asking that question, I see.
I'll add one thing, which we touched on a little bit earlier, but one of the nice things about Estonia's tax policy, as far as having a company there, whether it's a subsidiary or a standalone, is that you're not taxed at the corporate level unless you dividend out, in other words, distribute earnings to shareholders. And that differs from the United States, obviously. And so sometimes you need to, so that wouldn't be covered in a tax treaty in that tax treaty, for example. So you really, what it comes down to, you want to talk to your tax advisor, legal advisors about getting that specific. But look, it's part of the European Union. It's and it is, there's plenty of business between the two countries. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, I have another question from someone. How do I invest into Estonian companies? Do you want to? Yeah, why don't you start with that, and then I'll jump onto it.
My territory, the corporate governance that I've been doing for so long. Like if we're talking about like direct equity investments now, equity investments in terms of like a VC investor type of investments into Estonian startups, then that is easy. The company increases share capital technically and then issues new share to the investor. So investor does not have to be physically in Estonia for that. It's just documentation most often is signed digitally. So yeah, and then with that increase, the investor becomes a shareholder in the company, and then on the side, obviously signing the necessary shareholders agreements, investment agreements, etc. So technical process is kind of, I would say, very, very straightforward. But yeah, it's what happens after that is a good question, because in Estonia, when shareholders have the digital signing functionality or possibility to sign digitally the corporate documentation, then it makes it all so much more easier. So it is highly advised that the new investor, at least one official representative of that new investor, actually applies for the e-residency card or identity, just to be able to sign documents easily without having the need of sending paper documents across the Atlantic and etc.
Got it. Okay. And I think this kind of came up as a sort of a follow-up to one of our answers. Estonia sounds like a great place to start and invest in a company, but is it also a good place to open a subsidiary for European activities? So I guess if, let's say there's family here has a business and they're doing well in the US, but they haven't really gone to Europe, and Sten talked a little bit about this, but is it a good place to establish a unit or a subsidiary?
Well, obviously, I would say yes here. That's my role. Yeah, that's my job. However, I would like to point out that it depends what kind of unit or subsidiary we are talking about. Like, what's the core business? So obviously, keeping in mind that Estonia does have a small population in number, so not all kinds of activities are that much feasible to do in Estonia. But when we are talking about an R&D unit, for example, then of course, well, you know, with the technical background we have available, no problem at all. And as you know, part of European Union, obviously you can easily cover the whole Europe plus Russian market probably as well. But I see that we are soon running out of our time for this webinar series. Would like to point out here then that obviously what you heard here over the last almost an hour, that was just scratching the surface and didn't cover all the aspects. And that was kind of the aim or idea as well, to make you feel that you want to learn more. And that's what we're going to do with the next webinar. Alvar, you can talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So our next webinar is on September 14th, and we're going to be talking to a number of fund managers. They'll be here presenting, taking questions from everybody. We're going to strive anyway to have VC, public securities, debt manager, real estate, you know, a wide variety, so you can get a feel for each. You know, whether those folks are directly looking for investors, frankly, I don't even know right now. They're here to talk to American investors and get your perspective on those things. And you know, happy to make the connections if it makes sense.
Yeah. We will be also covering very briefly, like maybe more of the legal and taxation wide questions with the overview at that time as well.
Exactly.
That's the plan.
Yeah, there's a couple of things wanted to point out between now and then. So next week on June 17th, if I recall correctly, is
17 in the morning of East Coast time, 6 o'clock in the
morning, 9 a.m. East Coast, 6 a.m. West Coast. There's a live event from Tallinn featuring 7 of our startups. So that's maybe something worth logging in for. And at the end of August is something called Startup Days in Estonia's second city. It will be hybrid. At this point, travel is very difficult from the US to Estonia. That may change due to the pandemic, you know, getting better. But there will be that may be a good opportunity if things open up to see some of these companies, talk to some of the funds, and I'm going to do my best to be there, as is Maris. So love to please reach out to us. Let us know if you're interested in going. If it's possible, then we'd love to see you there.
Right. We will be sending follow-up emails to all of you who signed up to this event anyways with the links so that you can see how to sign up to those events and how to get access. But with that being said, I think it's time to say thank you for joining us, and thank you for being interested in Estonia. We are very much hoping to see you again on September 14 at our next webinar. Until wishing you a lovely summer.
Enjoy yourself. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.